glad that you joined us tonight. My name is Benjamin Smoke. I'm pastor of Mountain Springs Baptist Church in Piedmont, South Carolina. And I'm thankful tonight just that we can get together and have just a conversation. That's our heartbeat. I'm glad that you're going to meet two dear friends of mine, Dr. James Noble and Reverend Jeff Smoke. And the one thing that we all three have in common is our desire that the gospel guides our conversations and our thoughts. And so just a little bit about me as we get started. Each of us are going to introduce ourselves and give you a little bit of our background. But I grew up in the lower part of the state. Was introduced to different, a diverse background of friends because of the area I grew up in South Carolina. The high school I went to was probably close to 50-50 as far as race, 50% white, 50% African American. And so I didn't grow up seeing a lot of different color. I grew up seeing just a lot of friends. And so understanding a lot of the things that we're dealing with as a nation now, I go back to the community I grew up in. And I was telling my son the other day, Dr. Noble and Jeff, one of the greatest influences in my life was my band director in high school, Mr. Harris. He was a African-American gentleman, mentored me through middle school and high school, and he's one of the, I guess just when I look back at school for me growing up, he was one of the men that made a big difference in my life. And so that's a little bit about me. Dr. Noble, you thank you for joining us tonight, and just share a little bit about your story.
Yes. Hello. I'm Dr. James Noble, and I pastor Mountain Spring Baptist Church in Anderson, South Carolina, and also vice president at Anderson University for Diversity and Inclusion. And I was raised in Little Rock, Arkansas. Little Rock, Arkansas is my hometown, and I attended the historic Little Rock Central High. Of course, you remember the Little Rock Nine, which was a landmark case for the civil rights movement, where 9 students integrated the all-white Central High School. I graduated there in 1985. And of course, is much integrated then, and so very thankful to have that opportunity and the privilege of being able to attend Little Rock Central High School. So that's where I was born. After my undergrad studies there in Little Rock, I made a beeline to Memphis, Tennessee, where I had my master's of divinity there at Mid-America Baptist Theological Seminary, and also with my PhD there as well. And then from there, moved to South Carolina, Anderson, South Carolina, to be on faculty at Anderson University. And then also was able to, after that, start pastoring Mountain Spring Baptist Churches. So I've been there for 3 years as a pastor there, and 4 years at Anderson University. So very thankful to be living in the upstate. And so we're grateful also to be able to have this conversation. And I've been waiting for this, and of course we know what's going on in our land, and we thankful for the conversation that we'll be able to have.
Well, thank you, Dr. Noble, and I'm very thankful we get to do this. One of the things that I grew up in Aiken, South Carolina, so lower part of the state, and yes, my name is Jeff Smoke, but as far as we know, we don't have any direct family connection. Benjamin and I, surely somewhere down the line, we've got some paths crossed, but in Aiken, growing up, we had Aiken County is roughly 15% African American, and growing up there, I had, clearly with some of the schools I'd go to in the part of town we were in, we would have a higher number than 15%. So I just grew up used to having friends of different colors, but racism was part of growing up in Aiken. And some of it was overt and some of it wasn't. It was just kind of there. Further, as I graduated high school and went on to college, I went to the Citadel and then graduated there and started in law enforcement in Charleston. And the city of Charleston at the time was about 50-50 African American and Caucasian. And I worked there for a while before I met who was to be my future wife, and that led to some life change to where we ended up back in Aiken County, and I was on the sheriff's office there, and discovered real quick that it did not matter where you were policing, and I found that we were answering the same kind of problems in our community, regardless of skin color. We had the same kind of problems, same kinds of calls, and that was not because of someone's skin color, and it's not a skin problem in that regard, it's a sin problem. And I began to learn that, and it wasn't until I got to Aiken County that I really began to see how law enforcement could even be a ministry if you look at it the right way. But I also learned some of the problems in law enforcement as well. And so there's some good things that came out of that. And the whole time knew I was called to ministry, and I didn't like that I was called to ministry. I was kind of stubborn in that regard. And so it took a while for me to surrender to that, but I finally did, and went and got my master's at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. And through the years of doing that and doing ministry with various churches in various capacities, I began to get a heart for churches working together. And it has really hit home with me that very, very often churches don't work together like they should. Unfortunately, in some of the churches, they feel like they got to compete with one another for some reason, even though we serve the same king and we serve the same gospel. And then on top of that, God really started laying on my heart that why is it that not only do churches struggle to work together, but why is it that we're struggling to work together across racial and ethnic lines as well? And so Lord's been really doing a work in me on that, and really giving me a heart that we work together. So tonight even, one of the venues that you might be watching this video on is a Greater Together Outreach Facebook page. And the whole purpose of that organization, if you will, is that it's just churches coming together to do different things together in our community. So that's been good to see that begin, and I really, it's kind of neat too that Dr. Noble and I actually met in Tennessee before he came to Anderson, and which we had just left Anderson and moved to Tennessee, and so then he gets moved to Anderson, and then Lord brought us back to Anderson County, and then we're pastoring 5 minutes from each other. And then just we've been able to work together on some things as well, and so is Benjamin's church and ours, and it's been really neat to start seeing that cooperation happen. I really, in my heart, know that this is an important conversation for us to have, and the church has a role to play in this dynamic, and I not only just that we got to start working together, but we got to make a difference and be the salt and light, and that's my heart here.
And that's really our conversation tonight. We've kind of themed our conversation as this: loving your neighbor, race, reconciliation, and the role of the church. And Dr. Noble and Jeff, just kind of, I framed this for our church Sunday. I told them, I said, as because the one elephant in the room, I guess, for everybody is this is a conversation that's taking place in our culture today. And so the role that I believe the church has to play is as believers, we're allowing so many people to speak into this conversation, but so oftentimes we don't take the gospel view. We don't view it through the lens of the gospel. We hear this news organization or whatever social media, the latest trend on there, and I think for us tonight, my heart is that we kind of take a step back and not what is Fox News or CNN or NBC or CBS or ABC or anybody, but what does God's Word say? And how are we called not just to have a conversation, but how are we to put action into that? How are we to truly love our neighbor as Christ has commanded us to do? And so I guess that's a great dive in right there is just what does that look like for us when we hear that statement, love your neighbor, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, when we think about that particular verse, Matthew 22, verses 36 through 40, Jesus was asked that question, what is the greatest commandment? And of course, Jesus went on to tell them that it's to love the Lord thy God with all of thy heart, soul, and mind. And then the second one is just like the first one, and that is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so, as you said so eloquently, that we have themed this love your neighbor because, I think that was at the heart of Jesus' message. And I think it was at the heart of his teaching because he even taught his disciples. He says that, that you should love one another even as I have loved you. And so that's the new commandment that he gave us. And so when we look about and think about what's going on in our world, it starts with loving God. It starts with loving him. And frankly, pastors, I don't know if people can really love as they should, love others or love their neighbors as they love themselves without loving God first. Because, it says that God is love, right? And so is it a true love there? If a person really doesn't love God, is a true love there for loving your neighbor if at first you don't love God? And so I think Jesus was very pointed in saying that. And so yes, how do we love our neighbor? What does that really look like? And of course, Jesus says wholeheartedly, right? With all of your being, everything that is within you, love God, heart, soul, and mind. And then he says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so I think about how much I love myself, right? how much attention that I give to my body, how much attention that I give to the things that I want. Man, if I really, and I think we're all at fault here. I mean, because if I think how much I really love myself, do I really love other people that way? So it's a great, it's the greatest commandment, right? And so it's a great work that needs to be done within our churches and within our communities.
Well, and to that point, I think, you asked the question, can you truly love someone if you haven't loved God? If you don't have a relationship with the Lord, how can you really have the right kind of relationship with other people? And Scripture even says that in 1 John 4:20. John just calls you out. He just says to you, he says, if anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he's a liar. For he who does not love his brother for whom he can see, cannot love the God who he cannot see. And so I really see that as, if we can get a relationship with the Lord right in the church, it's going to be a whole lot easier for us to love one another. And, for us to say, well, sure, I love my African-American brothers and sisters down the road. Well, prove it. Right. And I think, and I know there's a lot of dynamics to this. I mean, the reality is Dr. Noble and your church and my church are right down the road from each other. They're about the same age, about 150 years old each. They started basically right after the Civil War. So you and I and our folks have inherited segregated churches. That
right.
We didn't ask for that, but that's what we got.
That's right.
So given what the Word says, what does it look like now to say we're going to love each other? Mm-hmm. And in my view in the Bible, when it talks about love, it's not just an ooey-gooey feeling. Right. It's a decision and a commitment that is shown in your actions. And so I think that is one of the things that as a church, I mean, like you said a while ago, there's all kinds of voices out there right now. But right now in the church, how are we doing what the Word of God tells us to do? And what can we improve on, would be my question.
And I think what we're doing tonight is a start. I know our churches have worshiped together. I know, Dr. Noble on Mountain Spring has come and worshiped with us, and we've gone there, and y'all, vice versa, y'all have worshiped together. One thing, Dr. Noble I've heard him say so eloquently several times is diversity in the church starts in the pulpit. And I think that's got to be an intentional decision. Like loving your neighbor is intentional. And I think as pastors to say, hey, granted, like Jeff said, what we have is not necessarily what we asked for, but it's the world we live in. It's what we've inherited. And so rather than focusing on how do we change the past, because you can, it's how do we make the future better. And I think that's the torch that's been passed to us. And at the end of the day, the question we're going to answer is, what did we do with the opportunities that we had? You know, we can only be responsible for how we led, how we pastored, how we preached, and we can be responsible for our actions. And I think it's about intentional choices, because the reality is, you know, we're not wrestling. You know, what we wrestle against is, you know, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. You know, Satan is doing all he can to destroy, to distract, and to steal, you know, what we have. And so I think that's the first thing, you know, as we've begun to have this conversation. For me, my prayer is, okay, God, you know, we've seen you do some amazing things through some churches in our community. You know, our relationship with Mountain Spring and with Bishop Branch, and we have another sister church down the road, Sweet Canaan. God, how do we protect that and build upon it, rather than letting Satan use this time to tear it down and to destroy it? And so I think it's got to just be an intentional mindset.
Yeah, Pastor Benjamin, I think you're correct. And let me say this also, that, you know, prior to all that has happened this year, of course, with you know, with the senseless killings and the murders, and Breonna Taylor, and even as we think about George Floyd, and even Ahmaud Arbery, even in February, prior to all of this, guys, we were already worshiping together. We had already brought our churches together. So this conversation that we're having tonight is not reacting on what has transpired in these last couple of months, but just years ago, we had already brought our worship, our churches together. Why? Because we were very intentional. And so the love that we talked about is the love that we've shown already to our communities. And so we're proactive, in other words, in really bringing about racial reconciliation, helping our people to understand the importance of diversity. As you said, Benjamin, yeah, diversity starts in the pulpit. It starts with us as pastors, preaching and teaching, being intentional about showing our churches how we do need to love each other, how we do need to love others who are different from us. And so it's something that we have already done. And then let me also say that I wasn't the one who approached you all. You all approached me at different occasions. So I think it says something about your heart about diversity, and about loving each other, and about showing others that we care about Black people, because you called me. And so I was very grateful and very thankful for the passion that you all have to really show the love that Jesus really talks about.
And I appreciate just the response that we've seen among our people. But even just the love that I know I experienced coming to your church, and I appreciate you sharing your pulpit with me and giving me the privilege and honor to stand in it, because you're big shoes to fill, brother. I mean, you're a great preacher, and it
You're
was
too kind, man.
and it was energizing though to come alongside worship, and then have so many folks come up and just love on us, and I know it was different for some of the folks in there. And it was different for some of the folks at our church when we did the opposite, but it was so needed. And I mean, I know in our church, after it was over with, I had a couple of people coming up to us in tears saying, this has been so long overdue.
Yep.
And because at the end of the day, we serve the same Lord, and we've got the same mission, and that's important. And again, you know, I think I read, it was maybe Tony Evans said something along this line of, if it doesn't change in the church house, it can't change in the White House. And by that, he meant anywhere else. So that's
Correct.
I take that to heart, that if the church doesn't get this right, then we can't begin to expect to have any impact on our community, and we can't expect to change our culture. I believe this, and this is after George Floyd, and the Lord just really has used this time to, again, not to be reactive, but just he would not let, as y'all know, these things have happened, and the news just spends a lot of time on it, and then the news chases the next story, and this is forgotten.
Right.
And that's been the normal pattern, but this time God wouldn't let me forget. God wouldn't let me let it go. And I'm getting ready to preach on a series on Revelation, and excited to do that. But in my preparation for that, of course, Revelation 7 comes up, and we have that picture in heaven that John sees of all of these people, the countless multitude of folks that he says is from every tribe, nation, and tongue. And they're all wearing the same clothing. They're all dressed in white robes. So how did he know that they were from every nation, tribe, and tongue? Because of their skin and because of their look. And he could tell that they were from different places. So when I look at that, I'm like, okay, there's a picture. And I know in our talks about multi-ethnic ministry, very often in those circles when we talk about it, that becomes the paradigm. Hey, this is what the church should look like. But I think a lot of people say, well, we'll get there when we get to heaven. We just got to wait for heaven. And I'm like, no, we don't. And in this process, according to Ephesians 2, Jesus Christ shed blood, breaks down the dividing wall, and kills the hostility. That's the verbiage that's used there, between people groups who normally would never be together. And if he can do that for Jews and Gentiles in the first century, he can certainly do that for us in our context. And I came away with this one point. The church, and when I say the church, I'm talking about the people who follow the Jesus of Scripture, not the Jesus of their own making, but they believe in the gospel, they have become believers. That's the church, and that can be anywhere. The church is the only people group on the planet who have the actual power to be authentically united across ethnic and racial lines. And I want that to sink in for a second. We are the only people group on the planet to authentically be able to do that. Now, sadly, in our country and context, there are secular organizations that from the outward appearance look better at it than we do.
Correct.
But their diversity and, quote, unity is not the authentic, Christ-given unity that Jesus is looking for. The church is supposed to have that.
Right.
And so... and unfortunately, from the outside looking in, and even from the inside, we don't have that unity like we should. But we're the ones that's got the power to do it. And so
Right.
I think we need to start exercising that power that's been given to us.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. And, while a lot of people are searching for the answer, God has given the church the authority and the power to be able to answer all the questions that we have in our land. Right? It has to come through the church. Well, let me ask this question to you two gentlemen. And, and I mentioned how, you all called me in our church and said, hey, can we worship together? Can we bring our members together and let's worship across racial lines? You talked about Revelation 7 and 9 about how heaven is integrated. So if heaven is integrated, why in the world is the church segregated, right? Because we think about 11 o'clock, as Dr. King said, the 11 o'clock is the most segregated hour of the week, right? So what is it that's in you to call a black man in a black church and say, hey, we love us to come together and worship together? So explain, help the people to understand what's in your heart.
I often tell our folks that we can't go do somewhere else what we're not willing to do here. And I often use that in context with missions. We'll send teams or money. We're quick to do that, send it to China or whatever. But oftentimes we want to stay in our own little cocoon here. We sent teams to the Dominican Republic, and folks will go and serve and love. And my heartbeat as a pastor is to it's not just because I think we have to be very careful that to say I'm not doing this just to push an agenda or to adapt a paradigm, as Jeff mentioned, but I think to be united as believers and to show our folks that hey, we worship the same God. I mean, I know that was my heartbeat when we had you here the first time. I think you hadn't been at Anderson too long, and we were doing just a special series of messages and I was actually introduced to you by Dr. Whitaker, and he was telling me that you'd been on staff there, and thought it was just a great time for you to come. And I think actually when I contacted you, you hadn't even gone to Mountain Spring yet. I think maybe you were the interim or something, and just getting integrated there. And then as we began to talk, we're Mountain Springs and you're Mountain Spring, and just but I so he often says that we came off of him, because he's the spring and we're the springs. So but I tell you, I left the night that you preached here. We left and got in a car, and I told my wife, we've all been in services where it felt pushed. It felt that the pastors might have had the same heart, but the people didn't. But man, I think you and I were in the parking lot before our folks were, because they were all standing around talking. There were folks that, as they got together that night, realized, hey, I work with so-and-so, or I know so-and-so. And just, it wasn't just the worship, man, it was the fellowship after. And just to see those two churches come together like that. And then when we came to your place, I'm like Jeff, man, it was a privilege to preach in your pulpit. But once again, to be embraced by your people. And it wasn't like, hey, this is something we're doing because Dr. Noble wants to, or my folks, this isn't something we're doing because Pastor Benjamin wants to. It's man, we want to. I mean, because they had a true choice to come. And so for me, that was my heartbeat is hey, we're not going to send folks overseas to do missions and to embrace different nationalities if we're not going to do it here. And so it starts at home. And so that's kind of how I got connected with you.
Well, I think for me, I'm a bit of a nerd a little bit, and so I love digging into biblical backgrounds and the history and the anthropology and archaeology and that kind of thing, and I love movies. And so as I began to study more about the anthropology and archaeology in the background, and I'm watching movies, and some of which are about the Bible, I began to realize real quick there isn't any white people in the Bible. There's not a Caucasian, there's nobody look like me in the Bible. And so when I watch these movies that they produce, and it's cast mostly with European-looking Caucasian folks as the main characters, I'm like, so something's wrong here, because I pick on that a little bit, and my kids cannot stand watching a movie with me when it comes to that. But I'm like, wrong, that's wrong. So anyway, so that nerdiness kind of led me to this reality that, hang on a minute, when Paul talks about the mystery of the gospel in Galatians 3:16, and he says, the mystery of this gospel is that the Gentiles were included into God's people. I'm that Gentile. I'm that person. I was the outsider. I was the minority. I was the person who wasn't supposed to ever be there, but God said, I love you, and I'm going to graft you in.
Amen.
And then I look at our current context, and again, we've inherited this context. I mean, when you think about, and this is one problem I see, that there are some folks who want to discount the existence of racism. The reality is this. No, racism isn't behind every rock and tree, but it's there. And coming out of law enforcement, I know that most cops that I've ever worked with are good guys who are, and women, men and women, who are doing their job and truly want to serve the community. Are there troublemakers among them? Yes, because they're human, right? We're going to have some folks there, but for the most part, I really walked away from law enforcement seeing that most people were going to do their job. I also walked away knowing that law enforcement's a mission field in and of itself. These law officers need the gospel like anybody else does. But all that to say, when I walked out of those experiences and that nerdiness as well, I began to realize, man, what a grace that I was included. And now we have this context where there's a whole segment of our society that has been excluded for so long. And why is that? And in the church, we should never exclude someone else because of their ethnicity or racial makeup, because I wasn't excluded. And by the grace of God, I'm a child of God. And there was no character in the Bible that looked like me. And so I that really was convicting to me that said, you know what, we've got to change this aspect of our experience in the American church. And in some ways, it's a uniquely American issue in this context, in this, that the relationship between blacks and whites in our country started through the institution of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
You can't expect a relationship that starts that way to go well. And, you know,
Right.
and then when the slavery ended, we had 100 years of state-sanctioned segregation. I mean, where African Americans were treated as second class. And we've got folks alive in our church right now that grew up in that. So they've experienced that. We can't expect that magically disappeared, the repercussions of that have just vanished. So there are and we've got lingering results. We have segregated churches, right? And so
Right.
why are we excluding anyone based on their skin color? And honestly, I don't think, Dr. Noble, your folks or my folks are necessarily getting up on a Sunday morning and saying, I really hope we don't have to worship any black people today. That's not intentional. It's just what we got.
Right.
But if we're not intentional to change it, it never will
Right.
change.
Right. And I think I was going to say, I think that's the key. That's where we are now. I just want to kind of swing back to what Jeff said a moment ago, talking about a paradigm. And I think a lot of times when we look at this, and I'm thankful that the Lord gave us the foresight to be proactive, not reactive, because we're not just sitting down having this conversation as three pastors after something's happened. We're sitting down as three friends who have been through this, as you said, for several years, have worshiped together, had conversations together, and the reality is we're united, but that doesn't mean we're uniform. I shared a quote with Dr. Noble the other day, Jeff. That I've been preaching through 1 Peter, and in 1 Peter 3, verse 8, he talks about being like-minded, being united in spirit, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted. But Warren Wiersbe said it this way. He said, unity doesn't mean uniformity. It means cooperation in the midst of diversity. And I think that's key. We're not going to all look alike, but it's what does our heart say? And how are we going to cooperate to change what happens in the future? Because I think that's the opportunity I have now is to invest in my church, invest in my kids, and to say, hey, I grew up a little different than Jeff and then you, Dr. Noble, and was there some racial issues in the area where I grew up? Yes, there were. But at the same time, I also grew up not seeing a whole lot of difference because I had a lot of African American friends. I mean, that's just the reality. I was in the band in high school, and so I had a lot of friends that were in the band, friends that I went to school with. Still some great friends today that came from that period of my life. But so while I had it good, I want my kids to have it even better. I want my kids to understand what I grew up with, but also to understand that even though what I had was good, it wasn't great, but what they can have is something better than what I had. And I think if each generation has that mindset, then we're going to make progress. Because like you said, there's nothing we can do to change the past. I mean, history is history, but we get to decide what's written today.
Right. Dr. Noble, what, from your perspective, what is something, maybe an intentional step that we as churches, us three, but also other churches, what should we be looking to that would help believers in our churches say, okay, here's some intentional steps I can take. Yes, it begins in the pulpit, but it also happens in the pew.
Yeah.
So what needs to happen in both the pulpit and pew, from your estimation, is a good starting point for some folks?
Yeah, I think that as we look at leadership in our churches, I believe that we need to begin with multi-ethnic staff, multi-ethnic preaching teams. I think that's important as well, not to just have multi-ethnicity, say at the table in meetings, but then also have multi-ethnicity being shown throughout, up front, out center, and up front, and be very intentional about that, because I truly believe that in any organization, whether it's a church, whether it's a business, if the demographic of the body is diverse, then I think the leadership should represent that. Leadership should represent that, because what does that say? Let's take a church, for instance. If a church is, if the neighborhood or the community where the church is a diverse community, then I believe the church should represent that. Why? Because that's saying that, hey, we love our community. That's saying that we are evangelizing our community. We are winning souls to Christ in our community. They are becoming members of our church. And then from there, from the congregation, I think what we must do then is to raise up leaders from our congregation. Why do we feel like we have to always go out to find to replace staff members or to fill a position from someone outside the church? I think we can look right in our community of people in the body and say, hey, we're training them, we're discipling them, we're making them into leaders. And so if the body is diverse, then we bring up those members from the body into leadership. And so then what that says is that we're discipling our members and we love them. And so we want to be able to use them in leadership, and so that they can use their gifts. So I think it starts there. I think it starts with multi-ethnic leadership. It starts with discipling or evangelizing our communities, and then bringing them into the body, and then training them and how to be Christian leaders, men and women Christian leaders, right? So I think those are some intentional things that we can do. Then also, I believe that we need to worship with other churches who are different ethnicities, right? Just like we're doing. So we can do that as well as we're doing. And somehow we need to figure out what's the next step, because we've even had events together. The Easter egg during Easter, we had things where we got together, egg extravaganza, and just bringing our people together and inviting the communities to come out, and then trying to disciple and to evangelize through that. So we've done events even together. What's the next step? Where do we go from there, right? I think that's probably a valid question that we need to ask, because I do believe that it needs to go beyond that. And then a third thing I think that we can do, Pastor Smoke, is that our dinner table, our people, we need to develop relationships of people who are different from us, right? And how do we develop those relationships? Someone once asked the question, said, well, in our neighborhood, it's a mono-ethnic neighborhood. We don't really have as much diversity in our neighborhood. And true enough, there are probably some churches that are like that, to where there's not a whole lot of diversity in the areas in which they live. But if you ask that member if there's diversity at their job, I bet there's diversity there, right?
Right.
And so I think that we need to develop those relationships, and then ask the question, who's sitting at your dinner table? Who do you invite to your home? So the intentional relationship aspect needs to go to our dinner table. And when it goes to our dinner table, what does that do? That helps me to understand and know who you are. That helps you to understand and know who I am as a person. And so we get to know each other. We develop those relationships. And I think we'll discover that we have a lot more in common than not.
Absolutely.
I think, and just to follow your point, I think that's the biggest key, is being intentional. And so I think for this conversation tonight, I think my prayers for folks that are watching this, when they finish this time together with us, that's their heartbeat, that they take away from this is, hey, that I may not be where I need to be, but I want to start moving in that direction. And I think that's true for each of us even tonight, that we realize that we can all make strides to be better in this area. We can, whether it be our personal life, whether it be as a pastor, as a leader, as a believer. And I think I guess a lot of times we come away from conversations or things like this thinking, it's going to take a lot to get there, but so-and-so is already there. The reality is there's probably nobody in our country that's there yet. We're all on a journey, and it's not the mindset that we've arrived, but that it's, hey, I got to do more tomorrow than I did today to get there. And I want to keep building. I want to keep growing. It's like you said, what we're doing is great. We're worshiping together, but not settling for that, saying, hey, that's good enough. We're doing that. But okay, we're worshiping together. What else can we do? How else can we continue to minister and serve and reach our communities together? And I think the one word that just sticks out in my mind about this whole conversation is intentionality. We're intentional about worshiping together, intentional even as individual churches about ministering and allowing our church to be a mirror of what our community looks like. And not just saying, hey, I'm going to go down this block, or I'm going to go down this street, or I'm going to go to this house, but man, I'm going to reach our community. Regardless whether it's African American, whether it's Hispanic, whether it's Asian American, whatever. Whoever lives on that block, man, our goal is to reach them with the gospel of Christ.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'd like to ask this question to you all as well. When we think about where we're talking about diversity here, and we think about integrating our churches, I've noticed that that blacks, that we're more prone to go and to worship in white churches, and even to join those churches and to be under a white pastor or white leadership. And I don't see that happening on the other end, with whites coming and joining black churches and being under black leadership. And why do you think that is?
I think there is, and I've heard this expressed among people, that there is a certain, and I think this goes both ways, honestly, but I've actually heard this expressed among some white Christians that they aren't sure if they're okay to be there, which is silly when you just think about it. But there is this perception or feeling like, am I going to be, is it okay for me to come? Am I welcome? And that's why I said earlier, when we came and worshiped with y'all at your church, I mean, we were welcomed. I mean, it was great. We ate together afterwards, which is what good church people do, is eat a lot. So, we really felt that love and everything. But I think people won't cross the threshold is the problem, because of a preconceived perception that maybe I'm not welcome, or am I going to fit in? And I think this even speaks to worship issues. I've actually heard from both sides of that I've actually heard some black pastors say, well, I don't want to fight the worship war issue. And I've heard the same from white pastors. And I think that's an excuse, to be honest. Because when we experience Revelation 7, what worship style is going to be there? It's going to be whatever glorifies the Lord.
That's right.
And even in my own church, this is another thing that woke me up this week a little bit. We have a fantastic worship leader. Jeff Whiten is very talented, technically just own it when it comes to music. He has this technical skill that you don't see in all musicians, and does amazing music. And but I don't prefer every song we sing. Like, I don't prefer every piece of music that comes up every Sunday. There are certain songs that we sing that just doesn't fit my preference. But I have to suspend my preference, because at the end of the day, as long as that song is glorifying to Christ, it's good. It's great. It doesn't have to be according to my preference. Right. And so I think some of that is the differences in traditions and worship creates a false barrier, I will say, in our minds, that we can't cross over. And we can certainly cross over, but I've heard that discomfort expressed.
Right.
And again, I've heard it from both sides, but I do know there's a certain, especially in the light of, since we're hearing all the voices online and we're hearing all the voices in the media, we're not hearing the voice of Christ, our shepherd, because he's getting drowned out by us listening to all this other stuff, that we have this false perception we're not welcomed. And I think that can go both ways, but I just know from the white side, that's what I've heard.
And I think if we're not careful, because I would agree with Jeff, that's some of the conversations I've heard, but I think if we're not careful, we allow that to become an excuse as to why we don't worship together, why we don't, like you said, we do everything else together. I mean, we work together. Our kids play ball together. we get together for other things, but when it comes to worship, for whatever reason, those are the lines that have seemingly are drawn in the sand, and I'm just reminded of a conversation that I had Friday. I got a call from a lady that I knew growing up. She's an African American lady. Her husband was a pastor in Orangeburg, and she called and she was looking for a white pastor to help with a funeral that she had been asked to play for. The family didn't have a pastor, and they needed. She wanted to know if I knew anybody in Orangeburg, and my first thought was, well, why does it have to be a white pastor? But it was because it was a white young man, and but I think that's just the culture we live in. We automatically think that way when it comes to race, and so I think once again it goes back to us as pastors, and not just pastors, but as men. We're gonna lead our families, because before we can lead our church, we got to lead our families, and we've got to be willing to take that step ourselves. And for instance, if I think I speak for Jeff as well. I mean, we have no problem sitting under your preaching. I mean, I think there's a lot I know I can learn from the way that you pastor and lead, and you've taught me a lot of things just by being a mentor of mine. And so I think that in itself, and us not being afraid to say, hey, Dr. James Noble is one of our mentors, I think says a lot to our churches and to colleagues of ours as well, that that would line up with, well, I'm not sure that I could go be a part of an African American church, or even for African Americans that say, I'm not sure I could be a part of a white church.
And Dr. Noble, back on to that point, do you have you heard feedback over the years as to why? I mean, I do know that some people will come and worship at our church. We actually have a few African Americans at our church, mostly children and youth that come. We've had some adults come, and they enjoy it, and I get the same report every time. And I'm blessed in this to pastor a very friendly church. But they come back saying, man, I felt welcome. People just loved on me, and they felt that welcomeness, but they don't keep coming. And do you know of any reasons why that might be occurring?
Yeah, I would, I would say that it's really the black culture, right? It's our culture, and so our culture, of course, it permeates throughout the black church, and that experience for us is something that when we think about our music, we think about our preaching styles, those things. The black culture is one that's very charismatic. A lot of emotion and passion is put into it, and so for us, for whites to come in, many can't, in my estimation, feel as though that the culture in itself, the black culture in the black church, is very different from what they experience. And to your point, like you said, that just might be an excuse, right? So somehow we need to, and even when we think about the church itself, when we become saved, when we become Christians, and we become part of the body of Christ, God's church, then all of our preferences and our agendas really should go out the window. And we should be able to focus on the one thing that really brings us together, the one thing that brought us together, and that's Christ himself. He brought us together. And so we should be willing to drop all of the things that we desire most, or those things that we're looking forward to out of a church. And so I think those barriers that you talked about is really stopping us from really coming together as a church, the body of Christ, with different ethnicities within the church. And I think it's just all preferences. This is what I prefer. And if we can get past that, then I think that, the type of music that I prefer, the type of ministries that I prefer, the way the church looks, things like that. If we can just drop those things, man, and really focus on what's really at hand, then I think, now, is that easy? No, it's probably not easy, because when we think about multi-ethnic churches, they're hard to build. They're hard to maintain, right? But we have a God who deals in the impossibilities. And when we keep our eyes and focus on Him, then we should be able to come together as the people of God and really show the world that different ethnicities can come together, different cultures can worship together, the way we see it, how we come together at ball games and different events outside the church.
I just want to follow up. I read a quote this week in a book that I'm reading for a class I'm taking, but it really just hit home, and it really, to me, just piggybacks off what you said, and I just want to get y'all's thoughts on this. But it's a book called Missionary Methods, written by Roland Allen, and he says this. It's about Paul's view of unity in the church, and he said in Paul's view, or his view, unity of the church was not something to be created, but something which already existed and was to be maintained. Churches were not independent unities. They were extensions of an already existing unity. And I think that's what you're talking about, that our unity is not the church we belong to or the color of our skin. The unity that binds us together is the fact that we're children of God. I mean, that's the one thing that we have in common. No matter whether football teams, jobs, families, no family, whatever, throw everything aside, the one thing that unites us is Christ. So how do we, as you said, kind of get folks to lay down preferences and really focus on Christ?
I really think what we run into, and I run into this in discipleship and counseling and even just in plain conversations. When people are struggling with a problem, it doesn't matter, just insert whatever problem it is. I'm finding more and more what the source of that problem and why it came into being in the first place for that believer. Now I'm talking about for believers, is they put their identity in Christ second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth in priority. They put some other thing in their life first. And so Christ wasn't number one, and so it did not shape how they handled the situation. So it could be something good. It could be that they're finding their identity in their spouse, or they're finding their identity in their children, or they're finding their identity in their job, whatever it may be, and then that's when the problems begin. And so when I start finding my identity in the fact that I'm a southern white male, before I find my identity in Christ, I got a problem.
Right.
I'm going to skew my priorities and perceptions. And so, and of course, when you skew your priorities and perceptions, that affects your decisions. And so, so what I find is that we've all got to come back to what you said. We're all children of God, and I always emphasize this for people. Being human does not make you a child of God. It makes you in the image of God. But Christ was clear, only those who are in a covenant relationship with the Father are a child of God.
Right.
And that only comes through the shed blood and burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So what I find happening here is, and to that point that that Alan is writing about in that book, in Ephesians 4:3 says, be eager to maintain the unity. He didn't say be eager to manufacture it.
Right.
He said be eager to maintain it, keep it, guard it.
Right.
And what we've done in America between our churches, and I mean there's racism for other groups as well, but it's kind of unique in America about black and white because of the way slavery was introduced in our history. Okay, our history kind of makes it a little bit unique in some regards to that dynamic. We still have racism among Hispanic and Native American and Asian, and we see that. And again, racism is not just a white problem; it's a human problem. It's everywhere, and every Christian needs to call it what it is when they see it. But
That's right. It's a sin. Yeah, racism is a sin, and that's what we need to call it, right?
It's a sin. And so our youth pastor said something very profound the other day. Nathan has got a lot of wisdom for his age, and he said, the only way to really desegregate, he brought Dr. King's quote about the most segregated hour in America. He said, the only way to not have segregated churches is to not have segregated churches. And if you just think that through for a second,
Right.
it really just says, okay, we're going to put an end to that. We're just going to say no more of that. Now, like you said, it's not easy, and there's going to be struggles with that, and there's a lot of work to it. But when you look at what Paul did as the apostle, and he's talking to these folks, they didn't work out all the problems first and then form their church. And the New Testament church just came together because of the shed blood of Jesus Christ, and then they had to work through the problems. That's why the New Testament exists. The New Testament's working, one of its major points is to work through all of those problems that came up in the church. And Paul is addressing those issues in his letters. Peter's addressing those issues in his letters. Acts and the Gospels even address those issues. And it's really interesting to think, what if we're trying to solve all the problems before we really just get busy with what we've already got, and that's called the unity of our churches. I think there's got to be a balance to some of that, and we've got to figure out in some of those next steps, can we just go ahead and start working on being together, and let's graciously and under the lordship of Jesus Christ work through some of the things that will come up.
And I think the model that Alan writes about, Paul's model, I think in most of what Jeff said, I think a lot of times we focus on all the differences rather than focusing on the one thing that unites us. And the one thing that unites us is greater than all the differences that we have. So if that was our focus, if Christ was truly our focus, then he would far outshine all the differences and preferences that divide us. And so I think I agree with what Jeff said. I think, perhaps it's truly coming together and saying, man, Christ is the center, and we're going to build this thing off of him, rather than saying, hey, we're going to come together, and I like this music, you like that music, I worship this way, you worship this way, this is what I'm used to, this is what you're used to, and then how do we fit Christ into that? No, we build it off of Christ, and we build it off of him, all that other stuff will go away. That's what I believe. I believe if we truly build it off of him, all the other stuff will go away.
I think it was Tozer who said, if God be exalted, 1,000 problems are solved. When we just put him first, it solves a lot of things that weren't really problems to begin with, because it puts it in perspective. And then there are some problems that still need to be resolved. Don't mishear that. But the church, I think we've got to lead that way of, like you say, starting the pulpit. We've got to start that leadership. We've got to have that diversity in the leadership, and that's across the board. That's in any church. And then, Dr. Noble, you and I talked about trying to get some of our families together this year at the dinner table, being very intentional. In fact, we had a couple of families set up, and then COVID hit, so kind of pushed that back a little bit. But that is key. And sitting around the table, getting to know each other, to where we know each other's kids' names, we know each other's dogs' names, we know that maybe I like bananas and maybe you don't, and maybe you like chocolate ice cream and I like strawberry ice cream, whatever it may be, which I like chocolate ice cream, that's my favorite. But
I like any kind of ice cream.
Yeah, basically.
There you go.
But those are the things I think we've got to tackle. And I do look forward to our folks getting together when we can, after the pandemic stuff is kind of figured out. But to where we can safely do that. And I would say my family feels okay with meeting with somebody now in our home. And I'm married to a nurse, so we know that this isn't just being dangerous. We're just trying to, but we are welcoming to anybody who wants to come together. I just know that some folks aren't ready for that, and that's okay. But I do want to see us do that. I want to see us get our families around tables together. We even did an inaugural lunch together as churches at AU, and got our folks to start eat together, but then COVID hit, so,
Well, guys, I just want to thank you all for taking time out to be a part of this tonight. And I think we would all be remiss if we didn't just spend some time in prayer, not just for our churches, but for our nation. Because I believe as a nation, we are at a major crossroads. And as we've talked about throughout this time tonight, that a lot of different folks are seeking to be the loudest voice in this. And I think as churches, we've got to be vocal with the gospel and allow that to guide our conversation, guide our actions, and to take that perspective of we're going to love our neighbor regardless of whether our neighbor looks like us or not, thinks like us or not, because we know that they were all created in the image of God, and that I believe that, he died for everybody. I mean, John 3:16 tells us that he loved the whole world, not just certain folks. He loved everybody, and that's why he gave his life. And so I think tonight as we pray that, and we close out this time, that would be our heartbeat as pastors. And I think we speak for our churches, and we want to see a culture that comes together in a way that honors and acknowledges our Creator, our Sustainer, but most importantly, our Savior, and that He's with us tonight. And so, Dr. Noble, I'm going to ask if you would just lead us in a time of prayer, close us out tonight, and just you pray as God leads you.
Yeah, sure. And let me say a last comment, and
Sure.
and then also just thank you, brothers, for this opportunity that we've had. And this is just the beginning. I think that we need to really consider maybe coming back, maybe doing a part 2 or something like that, and just focus on, because I know we talked a lot about diversity in the church, but there are a lot of other things that we probably need to discuss as well, biblically and from a theological perspective, when it comes to race and when it comes to how what the role of the church is, during times like these. So I welcome that. But let me just say with this last comment, Mahatma Gandhi said that we should be the change that you wish to see in the world. And I believe that in order for us to really see some lasting change, is that it starts with us. That we need to be the change that makes the change, right? And so, I'm preaching through a series as well, No Fear, this year. And I started that in January, and I'm still in that theme. And so we don't need to allow fear to stop us from doing God's will. And I think just in these last and evil days, God is really calling the church together. He's calling the body of Christ together. We talked about that unity in Ephesians 4 and 3, Jeff, that you had mentioned, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. This unity, it needs to be an authentic unity, as you mentioned. We can do that as a church. We can do that as different churches, different races, different ethnicities. We can come together and be unified under the Lordship of Jesus Christ. So I just believe that it starts with us. We need to be the change that makes the change. And so I just want to encourage our people, encourage all our listeners, just begin to ask God, hey, how can I be a change maker? How can I be a change agent during these turbulent times that we're experiencing right now? And I believe through the will of God, He'll answer, and we can begin to make some change within our own individual lives. Then that can kind of lead to our churches.
Amen.
Amen.
All right, let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this time that we've had. God, it's an honor and it's a privilege to lift up the name of Jesus and honor Him and what He has done for us. God, we're thankful that He came into the world to redeem the world. And now, Father, through the church, God, that's our mission, is to seek and to save that which is lost. And so, God, we're trying to do it in such a way to where, God, you'll be honored and glorified in that. I thank you for these two brothers. I thank you for their churches. And Lord, and pray that you will continue to unite us together. God, we pray, Lord, that you will reverse the segregated hour on Sunday morning. God, we pray, Father, that the church could be the pioneer, the forerunner, the example of how different people can come together, love each other, worship together, and to glorify you through it all. And then to be able to go out into our communities and to live it and to be able to love our neighbor. God, we're so thankful, so grateful, Father, that you've shown that love toward us by giving us your only Son to die on the cross for our sins. Now, God, because of the love that you put in our heart, God, help us to go out, love those who are different from us, and God, to begin to make a difference in the world. Father, we love you. We do pray, Father, for the healing of our land. against this pandemic. Pray, God, that you will remove the pandemic from our land. We do pray, Father, for all the hurting families who've lost loved ones, the Marbury family, the Taylor family, the Floyd family, and countless of others, Father, who've lost their lives through such horrific deaths, and even through the rioting and the protesting, and innocent people are still dying. And God, we just pray that you bring an end to all of that, and help us as a church, God, to be a leader in the calls for change that will honor and glorify you. Thank you, Father. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen.